Hello, and welcome back to 106.9 Radio, the conservative business mogul. My name is John Deere, and I'm coming to you live from Grand Prairie, Alberta. Now, we understand that the past couple of years have been particularly difficult for all of our loyal listeners. The economy is in tailspin, and we wanted to give you guys the opportunity to call and talk to us about the actions that you believe will help stimulate economic growth within a free market economy. Caller 1, you're up.
Hey John, how you doing?
I'm just great, caller. How are you?
As good as I can be, I guess.
I'm so glad to hear that. Now, what changes do you think that the government could make to help stimulate the economy?
You know, John, candidly, I think the key to overcoming the recent economic hardship is through international trade. It is clear that the countries that export globally often develop companies that know how to achieve a competitive advantage in the world market, and this venture into new markets will generate jobs for the masses. Research has also shown that companies who export goods are more productive than companies who rely solely on domestic selling. Stated by the FedEx Trade Index, 65% of small businesses that trade globally say their revenue is increasing versus 46% of small businesses that do not trade globally. International trade is clearly a staple for a strong economy, and we see this with the many years of economic growth in Australia. Australia uses its geographic advantage to be a great trade partner for the Eastern and Western Hemisphere. We also see the economic growth in Canada history using international economic trade. For example, before World War I, we see economic flourishment in Canada due to the production and exporting of wheat. Our country's economy was built on international trade, and I think we should go back to our roots. Canada has turned to international trade in times of economic hardship in the past with tremendous success. Canadian production of pulp and paper production increased by 6 times what it was prior to the Great War. In Canadian fashion, we share our resources and skill with the world, and we always find economic benefit in return. This situation is no different, so the time is now to partake in international trade. I believe international trade and exportation is the solution to our problems. Increasing international trade will revive and diversify our economy. We will strengthen our fiscal position globally.
Bring up some really, really great points there. And how do you think that Canada could encourage international trade?
I think that the government should get rid of all tariffs, quotas, subsidies, or government prohibitions that inhibit the exchange of goods and resources globally. The motive of profit drives all commerce and forces businesses to operate as efficiently as possible, and by using free trade, we can maximize profits.
That's a great take. I agree that in order for international trade to be fully effective, there has to be no government intervention, as the market will regulate itself, due to what classical liberal economist Adam Smith called the invisible hand. The invisible hand shows how self-interest works for the benefit of all without government interference. For example, a baker makes bread in order to sell it for their own profit. The flour required for the baking must be purchased from a miller, who is likewise acting in their own self-interest. Thus, they both profit. The miller sells the flour and the baker sells bread. Speaking of business, now we're going to hear from a local business owner who has found the last year to be particularly difficult, what with people saving their money instead of spending it.
Thanks for having me, John. It's a pleasure to be a representative for the local businesses around town. We've had trouble with managing our finances due to the lack of demand and the high expectations of our government that feed off of our revenue. You know, Ronald Reagan's philosophy was, government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem. Throughout his years as president, Reagan introduced a philosophy called Reaganomics that introduced widespread tax cuts, reductions in government regulations, and cuts to the social welfare programs and social spending, which tightened the money supply to reduce inflation. And that was during the state's 1980s recession, which was actually the most severe recession since the Great Depression. So Reagan heavily cut the taxes, which resulted in the increase of revenue. There's, less unemployment, reduction in inflation, and the overall growth in the economy.
It's really interesting that you should bring up Reagan, because Reagan's take is actually very similar to that of Milton Friedman, who is opposed to any government interference in the economy. Friedman, like Reagan, believed that the government's role should be to regulate the money supply, not the economy. Regulating the money supply also regulates inflation and people's spending habits. But in an economic recession like this, the government can't really control, people's spending habits. So what do you think the government can do to help small business owners?
I think that the best idea is to reduce our income and business tax, which would allow us business owners to put the additional earnings into other investments. For example, I'd be able to give my workers employee benefits from the additional revenue. They're then able to focus on services catered to their own preference and needs if they're unable to afford it during a time like this. Through the reduction of taxes, the demands for goods and services would increase from customers with their higher disposable incomes. It can boost savings and investments, which increases the productivity of the economy. For my company, we export many of our products to international customers, which actually makes up a big part of our business. Tariffs turn the consumer's head the other way. The additional expense of our product is actually a really big deterrent to buyers. Looking back on the past, we can take the Great Depression as an example of tariffs contributing to the economic hardships. There was something called the Smoot-Hawley tariff that's created to protect domestic industries and jobs, but it actually worsened the issue. World trade plummeted by nearly 70% within 5 years. So I think that reducing trade barriers would actually increase exports and encourage more competition. There would be, reductions in cost of living, increases in income, and improvements in efficiency that would be seen among businesses. So to maintain our exports and connection to other countries, we gotta reduce the barriers.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
So in all, I hope for the country to give us as much economic independence as possible. We'd be able to support ourselves as we focus on our own needs. It will take time for us to get back on track with our business, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to adapt to these changes and continue to compete with my rival businesses.
Thanks so much for calling today. I really appreciate your time. Now we're going to hear from another caller who will talk about the importance of the free market economy in finance, monetarism, and the role of the bank in terms of currency.
Hey John, pleasure being on the show. In my opinion, we definitely need to move to a free market economy to get out of this tailspin. When you look at it financially, we need more promotion of private property and private banking. Banks play a very crucial role and are necessary to stimulate the economy. They help to facilitate the transfer of payments between households, companies, and the government, and also act as a middleman between people in business that save money and ones that need loans. This whole concept allows for people to deposit small savings into the bank, where they can then give out loans to businesses looking to invest, or say, like a family looking to buy a house. Banks also evaluate their borrowers looking for loans to ensure that they're trusted to pay their loan back. This means it's a pretty risk-free system, and that can link savers to borrowers. Look at the ex-president of Starbucks, for example, Howard Schultz. He was looking to invest in the company when it was just starting out. He needed a loan for around $100,000 to invest into his company. Without a bank, he'd have to find a wealthy man with $100,000 in his pocket, and he's willing to lend out to Howard. And then if the business or investment ends up failing, all that money's gone. With a bank, we can take a small amount of money from a large amount of people, creating a low-risk system. Say where 10,000 people all pay $10 to the loan, instead of one person having to trust the borrower. This also means the bank can look for investors that are trusted to pay back their loans. And there will be more borrowers that make profit than ones that don't, creating a low-risk system for the savers depositing their money. This meant that Howard Schultz was able to gather enough money to invest into his business that ended up becoming the world's most popular coffee shop. By continuing this, we can allow for more entrepreneurs to be given the opportunity to kickstart a business and promote their self-interest. Another part of free market capitalism that we need to promote and pay more attention to is monetarism, which helps to monitor the amount of money and currency that circulates throughout the economy. Milton Friedman is one of the most famous proponents of monetarism, and he made it based off the quantum theory of money, meaning that in the long run, the absolute amount of money doesn't affect the economy, but in short-term changes, the rate of inflation can matter. Monetarism controls the amount of inflation so that there's never too much inflation or too little inflation, which could be detrimental to the economy. When inflation gets too high up and the federal government's printing too much money, it will force prices to rise, and now people aren't able to understand what prices are rising due to inflation and which are just rising due to supply and demand. Although inflation would give you a short boost in economic stimulation, quickly people will figure out that inflation's happening, making it ineffective. When inflation is too low and wages are stuck in one place that aren't lowered as well, the declining flow of money will then cause employers to lay off their workers, causing an economic downturn. Having a constant rate of money supply growth optimizes the distribution of money and makes sure the economy is always stable.
Thank you so much to all of the callers who have shared their opinions with us today. My name is John Deere. This has been 106.9 FM, The Business Mogul, and I will see you next week when I'll be discussing how the Netflix movie Bigfoot is brainwashing our children with anti-oil and gas propaganda. See you next week.